So much of the comparisons that we make are wrapped up in wanting this control over like creating this perfect image of our perfect self. It just doesn't work like that. I don't care what you see on social media. There's always another story behind closed doors.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, who played on the tennis and field hockey teams at school before she took up running, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Well, this is kind of a bit of a special episode, and I do apologize. When I recorded this episode, I was so excited to record it that I actually did an intro, well, kind of half an intro at the beginning when I introduced my guest, but I hadn't prepared for it. I was completely nervous, and so it's a bit scrambly. So I thought I would record a proper intro. So that is this, so you feel more comfortable, you're used to this, and I want to welcome you to this special episode to talk about the fact that I am 8 weeks pregnant, which I can still barely believe myself. But yes, it is true. Yes, I did get pregnant on the first egg my body had released in 9 years. And I can barely believe it, but I am very, very excited and just so proud of myself that I did this because, you know, it hasn't been an easy journey kind of letting go and finding out who the heck am I, but I've done it. And you guys, let me just say first, thank you so much for every piece of support and love and just kindness you have shown me, like having people like you around me. It just means so much, and it's just made this process so much easier. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I just couldn't be happier to share this news with you. And that's why I am telling you at 8 weeks. I know the risk. I know you're supposed to wait until the 12 weeks, but I just couldn't do it because I felt like I was lying. I felt like I was deceiving. And, you know, I just wanted to show that, you know, even if something does go wrong, it's not anything to be embarrassed about. And I know you guys will be there for me if something does go wrong. So let's get on with talking about today. And if you do want to know more about what the heck I'm talking about, if you don't even know or didn't even know what episode you were getting here, you can go to my blog at tinamuir.com/pregnant, and I will tell you all about it in a ginormous blog post. There's also a video on there if you want to watch that. But this is an episode today where I am interviewing someone, but you are going to definitely learn a lot. We are talking a lot about pregnancy, but also about a recovery from amenorrhea. So today, my guest is Tawnee Gibson, also known as Tawnee Prazak. When I last interviewed her, if you followed me early when I was interviewing at Run to the Top, and I had Tawnee, who was then Prazak, on my podcast, and her story just really eerily freaked me out because it was so similar to what I was going through at the time, and she really had an impact on me. And I wanted to bring her on today because our stories have just been so interconnected. It just freaks me out. And crazy enough, we ended up getting pregnant within 2 weeks behind her, and so we're going through this together. I thought this would be a really good episode to kind of talk about all the things that go on, all the struggles we went to, and also Tawnee and I went at this from 2 different angles. You guys know that I definitely went at this from cold turkey. I'm going to stop running. I'm going to gain weight. I'm going to do everything in one go, like kind of an all or nothing approach. Whereas Tawnee wasn't prepared to do that. She backed away slowly. She never completely gave up exercise, and she found her own journey, and it took a little bit longer, but it still worked. And so I thought it would be good for people who aren't quite ready to take the ginormous step that I did. And this is a really good episode. Tawnee is a wonderful person, and I will put lots of links in the show notes to all her stuff if you do want to hear more. But before I forget, as I didn't mention this at the beginning, so last week we talked to Mario Frioli. I hope you enjoyed that episode. He is a great guy, kind of the eyes and ears of the running world, and it's really good to hear from him for once rather than kind of him being behind the scenes. And next week we are going to talk to Magdalena Boulay. We talk about Western states. We talk about all kinds of things. She is definitely someone that I've looked up to for a very long time, and I'm really excited about what you think about this episode. So make sure you tune into that one too. So I am going to introduce our sponsor, who happens to sponsor Tawnee as well. But I did mention that in the original intro that I mentioned. So you'll hear from UCAN in just a few minutes. But I just want to take a moment to thank you one more time for all your support, for all your love. It truly means the world. Hello, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me for this special episode. This is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime episode, and I am super excited for you to meet my guest today. This is going to be an episode I pass along to people for years to come, I can just tell. So thank you so much for joining me. I will thank our sponsor quickly, who coincidentally also sponsors my guest. Smoothies, recovery bowl, bars, cookies, biscotti. What do all of those have in common? Any ideas? You can make them with Generation UCAN. How's that for a win-win? Learn more about Generation UCAN at generationyoucan.com, and I will give you a coupon code later in the episode for 10% off. All right. Now, Tawnee, I am really excited that we are going to have this conversation today. When we spoke about it, it was something that I kind of had in this like pipeline idea, but like it's so cool now that we both have this announcement to make. And I have announced today that I am pregnant. And
Yay!
I can also announce, although yours is already public knowledge, that you are also pregnant.
Yeah, you can't make this stuff up, folks.
I know. This is pretty impressive. And so I guess before I begin kind of asking you some questions, I just want to kind of preface this for anyone listening. So Tawnee, who was Tawnee Prazak back then, now Tawnee Gibson, was actually the kind of catalyst that got me going on this journey to become pregnant. And it is just insane to think about it now because, Tawnee, I had you on Run to the Top, maybe, was it 2 years ago now?
I think, well, it was only the beginning of last year that we started talking and working together, I think. Oh, maybe you did have me then on the podcast before that, and then we started working together after. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was around 2 years ago that I had you on my podcast. Mm-hmm. And I remember you were talking and you was explaining about kind of how you had kind of burned out and you'd been really stressed and you'd kind of reached a point where you weren't sleeping, your mind, you couldn't switch it off. And everything you were saying, I felt like you were describing my life and it kind of freaked me out. And so that was the initial like ding that kind of went off in my mind. And I've mentioned you many, many times to people when they say like, where did this come from? Because it was you telling me your story. So this is so surreal coming now. And especially as we are due within a few weeks of each other.
Crazy.
So maybe we could start with, for those who haven't listened to that podcast episode, your story, maybe like your past and how you kind of reached the point yourself where you wanted to focus on a family instead of, a career and everything else.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it, relevant to the topic of, hormones, female athlete health, all that kind of stuff. And because otherwise I could go on forever. But a little bit about me is that I am, self-motivated girl, just like you are, Tina, and decided pretty early on that I didn't want to work for anybody else. I wanted to work for myself and start my own businesses as a coach, a podcast host, do all that. And of course, on top of that, be a competitive triathlete. And that was something I got into 10 years ago, actually. My first triathlon was July 2007. And I went at it full speed. I'd always been an athlete before that, but I found my calling when I found triathlon. And I, over my career, 8-10 years or so, was on 50 podiums and, finishing top in my age group, all that kind of stuff, doing 70.3 world championships, which was my favorite distance. I didn't really do much of the Ironman stuff, but 70.3s were my distance. And all the while, I started hosting a podcast called Endurance Planet, which I still do to this day. And that podcast, little did I know, would grow into a real gig with real followers and like a real, it's the real deal. And also, my coaching business and all of that. And it was a lot, and I put a lot of pressure on myself. There was a while where I was also a fitness model working for endurance sports companies. And there was just this idea of needing perfection on all fronts, whether it was hosting the show or my performance on the race course, which, as you probably can relate to, Tina, as soon as you put yourself out there in a public front, all of a sudden performance takes another connotation when you start to put that extra pressure on yourself and you actually do good. And then people expect you to continue to do well. And, it's kind of a vicious cycle in that sense.
So I put a lot of pressure. Let me just pause you there. Do you think, how much of it do you think is actually other people putting pressure on yourself as opposed to you thinking other people are watching you? Like you said that. And I
it's all in your own head.
Yeah. They like watch
people
you and they're interested, but they it's like, oh well. And then, but it's in your head. So yeah.
People don't give a crap. If anything, people tend to like the stories of struggle and your bad days a little bit more because those are most relatable, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, all the while on the inside or the outside, I was doing great and things were going well. But on the inside, things were starting to, kind of fall apart, little red flags here and there. And I've always cared so much about my health. So I was seeing a doctor for certain things at this point, conventional medicine, because I was experiencing amenorrhea, just like you've been through. And I wasn't happy about that. But at the same time, I was happy doing what I was doing. So I wasn't really ready to make a change quite at that point. And then things started changing when I met my now husband and realized, hey, a family is something I want in my future. And at this point, my hormones are in a postmenopausal range and there would be no baby making going on, even if that's something I wanted to do at this point. So around 2013, it's kind of like a series of events that led to me deciding to pull the plug on training and pushing myself the way I was used to for all those years. And I started the path to recovery and healing and getting my health back. Hormones were probably at the top of the list, but it was also gut healing and a bunch of various other things that I had to tackle that had just gone haywire in my body. With endurance athletes, up to 70% of endurance athletes are going to experience gut issues at some point. And if you let that continue to go on, things just get worse and worse. And it's very much tied into hormonal function and all that. And I was ready to make a change. And, at that point, having kids was like not on the priority list whatsoever. I had zero desire to get pregnant and have kids. I still wanted, and this is where I think you and I differ as far as our stories go, which I think is so interesting because this really can relate to certain females out there, how they want to approach things. Is I wasn't ready to pull the plug completely. I was ready to change things and start working toward gaining my health back, but I was not ready to quit competing or training or just, sit on the couch, put my feet up and put myself in 2-mile runs. And that was it. I still wanted to train and I still was training like a triathlete. But as soon as I lifted that pressure and made a few tweaks, things started happening pretty quickly. I got my period back probably within 10 weeks after making that initial commitment, although it took some time for my period to regulate before I felt like I was, really in a good groove and really kind of understanding things. After I got my first period back, I still ended up doing half Ironmans and even it wasn't an ultra. It was a 30K. So technically ultras are anything over 26.2. And this was like around 18 or 20 miles. I was still racing that following year and enjoying it and trying to figure out like the balance. Can I have a little bit of the training? Can I still do some racing and get my hormones and health back on check? And that first year was kind of tough to find that balance. I didn't quite master it. And toward the end of that year, that would have been 2014, things started I started catching on. I started getting more regular. I started feeling better. Things were healing, in addition to hormones, gut, and all that other stuff. And I was like, okay, I'm in a good place. I think I really understand myself well. So let's do an experiment. My periods were regular at this point, and I wanted to try an open marathon. Up to this point, I had only done a marathon and an Ironman, and I'd only focused on swim, bike, run training. And, I had a half marathon PR on like 20, 30 miles a week. Like I was not a high volume runner whatsoever. So I was like, let's see what I can do. Or half marathon PR, I meant to say a 1:30 half marathon PR. Let's see what I can do by just putting my eggs in the running basket. But with the caveat, I will only do this if my health markers stay in check. As soon as I see red flags start to come back up, shutting it down or making changes.
What red flags for those you were looking for?
If my period disappeared or if I just felt like I was either losing too much weight too quickly or my gut started to flare up and I wasn't feeling well, or if mentally I was, getting a little too addicted to it and pushing harder than I knew was appropriate for me, things like that. So I put myself on a regimen of basically mostly MAF training. And those who listen to my podcast, Endurance Planet, will be familiar with that. It's basically training at a heart rate of 180 minus your age and getting really efficient at that aerobic heart rate. So that was, I'd say, 90% of my training for the marathon. And things were going really well. I was fueling enough and I was able to qualify for Boston with a 3:30 with doing that. And I was super proud of that. I was very, very happy that I was able to achieve not only that performance, but also able to keep my body in a place that I was very, very content and happy with. So that was a huge victory to be like, okay, I can perform and like have the best of both worlds. And then from there, I still was, John and I were, my husband and I were still not thinking about family planning at any point. we were still living the dream. I mean, we hadn't gotten married yet. So we were just having fun. And it wasn't till the end of 2016 that I decided it was time to maybe start this baby making stuff. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But hopefully in a nutshell, that's kind of, my journey of what it took to get my body back in balance. And then also realize, you don't have to necessarily go all in if you want, but understand if you take approach like I did, it might take a little bit longer to get your body back on track.
Yeah. And I think that's really good to mention. So for anyone listening, what we're saying here is that this is, Tawnee and I's journey are very interconnected, which you will continue to hear. But as she mentioned, we are coming at this differently in our approaches, and that I kind of decided I was going to do everything in one go. And as you mentioned, I, stopped running completely. I gained 15 pounds in probably 6 to 8 weeks. I didn't do any exercise, just ate, like you said, put my feet up on the couch and just sat on there. And, it was pretty extreme the way I did it. And, for me, that worked. And that's kind of my personality, all or nothing. But you don't have to do it that way, as Tawnee mentioned. So I just want to, for anyone listening, tell us about when you say you made some tweaks and getting that initial first period back. What did you do that? So you didn't stop running or training at all at any point?
Well, I was training for Ironman and 70.3 World Championships before that. So it was not, obviously I decreased my volume and intensity a little bit because those races were over. But at the same time, for me, it wasn't about just quitting training so much as the stress component. I think there was just a lot of stress in me. I was really wound up. I had put a lot of pressure on myself for those particular races because they were a couple of weeks apart and they meant a lot to me. And, they didn't go well at all, which was a sign that I was making the right decision to shut it down. A lot of it was stress. As soon as I just relaxed about it, I think that was huge. And also I think fueling and energy balance. I don't care what you say. Energy balance is a key factor in regaining your hormonal health, period. And one of the hardest things when I was working with conventional doctors was they would say, blatantly, exercise less, eat more. And while that's technically true, it wasn't presented in a way that resonated with me where I'm like, oh, okay, let's do this right now. Let's get on board with that. It's so, now that I do this and I work with females, I coach females in the same position. It's a very important mental component to making some of these tweaks and changes. So yeah, there's a stress component. And for some people, they may be appearing to eat enough calories. Like Tina, you were eating a lot, but we now that you immediately gained 15 pounds after you quit, we could still probably argue that you were not in perfect energy balance.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And I also know plenty of professional female triathletes who are getting pregnant. And perhaps they are, eating 5,000 plus calories a day and they're doing it right. And that's why they're still able to conceive in the midst of training. Where some of us, we get slightly under that and get slightly into a deficit and we just screw our bodies over. Every female is different as far as their set point goes and what amount of calories works for them. So, you can do formulas. You can say oh my gosh, Tina's eating 3,000, 4,000 calories a day. How could anything be going wrong? But it's more, it's that you might still be in the energy deficit, but it's also the other factors like stress and, pressure that you put on yourself. I know you were struggling with insomnia and other things like that. And those things have clearly calmed down since. So there's a lot that goes into it. And every female I work with tends to be a little bit different in what the secret is. But, since I've been doing this with females, I'd say that I have probably close to 100% success rate as far as getting females' periods back. But I can tell you for sure, there's no secret formula to doing it. It's everybody slightly different in how we approach it.
Yeah, no, exactly the right thing. And, I have actually worked with you myself in that I spoke to you whenever that was, a year or so ago. And then actually decided to have you as a consultant, one of the people on my team who I was working with to kind of try and figure out what was going on. And I remember, that was a huge part of things. We did tweak my diet and I think that was part of the thing for me in making such an aggressive decision was that I did have people that I was working with who were telling me, you were doing the right thing. But like you said, it's so individual. And I know you and I have had many, many conversations on the phone about struggling with the comparison trap. and, you know, seeing other people and saying, well, how can they do this, but I can't? How come their luck is happening and mine's not? And I'm sure I'm going to get a whole lot of haters today because for me, this came together so quickly. And I think, you know, I'm going to get people say, well, that's not fair. How did she manage that? But do you have any thoughts on how you kind of, or maybe still working on, I know I still have to struggle with it, letting go of that comparison? Because I'm sure a lot of the women who are in this situation that are thinking about taking the steps, be it the way you did it, it's like slowly backing away, or like aggressively like me, you still find that, you know, you're thinking, you know, I had other friends who had decided to make the change and their periods came back really quick. And I was like, well, why is that fair? So any thoughts on comparison?
Oh my gosh. I mean, well, if there's any haters against Tina right now, look to me, because it took me 8 months to get pregnant. Okay. Because I definitely did some things, quote unquote, wrong, if you will. I can't say that it's wrong, because honestly, my journey to getting pregnant is probably one of the most important 8-month journeys of my entire existence in life. Like, I've never been in such a good place from what I went through. So, that said, you know, the reason why I think, so when I was trying to get pregnant at first, I was seeing there's like a baby boom in the world of endurance sports, particularly triathlon right now. And it was messing with my head psychologically so much, especially because at that point, I had actually calmed down my exercise even more. I had put on weight myself. Yet then again, I see these girls who are performing at a high level all of a sudden just falling pregnant. And I'm like, wait, how does this work? Like, this isn't fair. And it really got to me at first. And then on top of that, like, as a result, I would put more pressure on myself to be doing everything correctly by textbook definition on how to conceive. And literally, I mean, whether it was measuring basal body temperature and having sex right at ovulation and eating all the food and making sure there's enough body fat on me, blah, blah, blah. And yet it wasn't working. And I come to realize like what it comes down to. And I hate to say this because if you're in it, like, it's the worst thing you can hear, but like letting go and relaxing and just like completely thinking about something else and not even necessarily thinking about timing everything down to a scientific like moment when it might happen is key. And it's the hardest thing to hear. And I hate saying it because it killed me when I heard people say that, just relax. I'm like, screw you. But I was able to ultimately just let go, like letting go. And now that I'm pregnant, Tina, you're probably even feeling this too. I've had to completely let go. Like, my body is not my own body anymore. What I'm craving, what I can eat, what I can't eat, what I can do from an energy standpoint each day, like every day is different. And I have no control over that. And that's completely okay with me now. So when it comes to comparisons, so much of the comparisons that we make are wrapped up in like wanting this control over like creating this like perfect image of our perfect self. Yep. And it just doesn't work like that. You know, I don't care what you see on social media. There's always another story behind closed doors. And, you know, I decided to not too many people talk about the process of trying to conceive when it's not happening for them. I did. You know, you can go over to my blog, tryton.com.
Yeah,
and
I'll put links.
Yeah. And you can see, you know, the struggle. Like, you can read my words.
Yeah,
you can feel like the mental like turmoil I had been in and the pressure I'd put on myself. And the journey to realizing like, this is not even worth it. Like, why am I doing this to myself? And then getting over it and getting pregnant. Like, literally, it took, as soon as I kind of went through that transformation of letting go, within weeks, I was pregnant. It's crazy. I think the girls who I know, like you, who got pregnant right away were the ones who had zero expectations. I have several other girlfriends who, you know, for whatever reason, maybe they're just getting off birth control. And, you know, they say sometimes it takes a while, or their weight wasn't ideal, whether too high or too low, or not regular periods. You know, the ones who got pregnant right away didn't think they could get pregnant right away. And then bam, they were pregnant right away. I, on the other hand, was like, I've done all this work. I have great hormones. I get a regular period. My husband's healthy. Of course we'll get pregnant right away. And it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah. So, do you think any part of it is, like you said, it was late 2016 that you kind of, do you think any part of it is saying like, right, now is the time to start? And that was always my fear, was that I would get my cycles back. I would say, okay, I'm going to have it for, let's say, 6 months, which is what I think I originally told you. And then we're going to start trying. On this day, we are going to start trying. But the fact that I, like you said, didn't have these expectations for these first months, but then my doctor had given me the go-ahead, and I was just like, well, you know, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, then it doesn't matter. Do you think any part of it is women who say like, right, now it's time? Whereas, like you said, if you do that and then you put the expectation of like, okay, it has to be now.
It was totally, I remember definitively being in Hawaii with my husband and us deciding, okay, we're going to start trying and, stop using protection and contraception, all that kind of stuff. And that all of a sudden changed it. And that sucked. At first we were even kind of like, wait, we still need to make sex fun and a thing between us, not about this, ulterior goal. So yeah, it does change it for sure. But it's really hard because what are you supposed to do? If you decide you want to start trying, you obviously have to take steps to like make it possible to get pregnant, stop using protection or whatever. And so you've planted the seed in your head. And so how do you plant that seed, but also at the same time, let go? And I think that's why probably a lot of us, I'm not an expert on this stuff. I've done very little research on it, but you can imagine intuitively, knowing that pregnancy is one of those things that seems to be so misunderstood or not misunderstood, but just no one really understands why things happen the way they do necessarily. You can imagine it's why it takes a lot of people a long time, is because each person has to go through kind of that mental journey of over focusing on it and then letting go of it, Yeah. You hear the success rates of people who start to go to IVF and then all of a sudden they naturally get pregnant because all of a sudden they're like, they've taken the pressure off. They're like, okay, science is going to do it for us. We're going to have our baby because we're going to go through this process. And there's no more pressure on them. And then bam, they get pregnant. I've talked to women who work in fertility clinics who say that's literally, it's the common story that everybody hears.
No, I could see that. And then maybe you could tell everyone about the trip that you had planned initially, because I felt when you said that was like your way of saying, okay, like I'm waving the white flag here. I'm not going to focus on this for the time being. But then it gave you something to like look forward to that wasn't related to the baby. So, everyone knew that if you got pregnant in that time before your trip, then you would be over the moon and happy and you weren't going to be not trying. But then it kind of took that pressure off of like, this is the only thing we're focusing on. So maybe tell us about that so that people can kind of think of something maybe different, make like a trip to Europe or something unique.
Yeah, what really worked for me was, I think that, when we made those initial decisions to start trying, I was all in. There was everything. We put our lives on hold as far as planning anything. And eventually, that wasn't fun. So I got back to training for a stand-up paddleboard race and started putting, more time and effort and thought into that. And then ultimately, our goal was to take a trip in June up to Northern California for me to do my race, and then hop over to Napa to do some wine tasting. And it was kind of a nostalgic trip for us because we used to do a race called Vineman 70.3 every year where we'd kind of have the same process. The stand-up paddleboard race was in the same place that Vineman was. And then we would hop over and do a couple days of wine tasting in Napa. And we hadn't done that in years. And it was going to be amazing. It was going to be our first wedding anniversary, all planned out. And between the stand-up paddleboard training and focusing on that. And then also, quite frankly, I went back to eating more low carb because honestly, say what you will about it, but my body just feels better on not overdoing it with carbohydrates, especially I wasn't training terribly, terribly hard whatsoever. So I was, changing things and not trying to over manipulate my fertility and chances of getting pregnant. I was just going back to living comfortably how I feel best and what works for me to menstruate normally and all of those things. And I just got back to that. And on top of the mental side of just kind of letting go of all these pregnancy thoughts, and bam. So yeah, taking my mind, putting, conception way down on the bottom of the list instead of having it up as this number one priority. Our whole world had to revolve around when I was ovulating and hopefully get pregnant. That was it for sure. Yeah. That was it. No, I'm not saying that works for everybody because I know people who still struggle. And, I'm very sympathetic to that. I was debating to whether even announce my pregnancy publicly because I just know how much of a sensitive thing it can be for women. And they have maybe even tried all the things I'm saying right now, yet they're not getting pregnant. It's a mystery and there's no necessarily definitive answer here. And that's, it's not like training where you can just push harder and hope, pretty much get the result that you're looking for. It's so different. And that's what I think has made me grow the most because of it, but also so sensitive to just this topic.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's what I kind of want to talk about a bit more now about, how this whole thing has been kind of brought to light a little bit more. And But firstly, before I go on to say that, this is a heavy question, would you change anything if you could go back now, go back to 2013? Would you change anything about up to this point?
No, I don't. And I wouldn't even wish to have gotten pregnant faster, even if, my friends were getting pregnant and all the triathletes are getting pregnant, because where I'm at now is such a beautiful place mentally, physically, and I wouldn't be quite the same person I am today if it hadn't have been for all those things. Now, there's something that's really important to me is that I talk a lot about the dark sides or the hardships that I've been through, but at the same time, I do not let my quote unquote struggle be my identity. I think it's really important to separate those things. Yeah, I've been through some shit, and has it been self-imposed shit? Definitely, for sure, on a large part. And some of it just kind of bad luck that, my body was just more sensitive, probably that too. But I don't live my life thinking like, oh, I went through all these things and Like, I'm very, very adamant about still living in the present and just saying like, look, I'm in a good place today. Whatever it took to got me here, fine with me for sure.
No, I think that's so important. And, even though my journey has been different in the, I guess it was maybe more intense because it was a shorter amount of time, but like, obviously once I stopped running, it kind of consumed my thoughts. And especially when my story kind of blew up in the media, it was like, that's all anyone wanted to talk about. And it was like, everyone knew my story. But I think, like you said, in that time where you overcome this, you learn so much about who you are, and you become like almost the person you want to be because you have to deal with those struggles. So I think for anyone listening right now and you're thinking like, this is so unfair, why is this happening to me? And trust me, Tawnee and I have had many conversations where one of us has been like, blah, 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 like venting on the other end of the phone about one thing or another, or how come this person can do this and that. But like, I think like for me personally, when I was going through that few months where I was, saying, who am I? Like, I'm not a competitive runner. I'm not even running right now. Like, what am I? I think although you might see it as a disadvantage, like, why is this happening to me? And both Tawnee and I have felt that too. Like, why am I the one that gets stuck? Like, I eat well. I look after myself. I make sure I get enough calories. I make sure I get enough rest. Like, why am I being punished when other people seem to treat their bodies like crap and they can get away with it? And you will be thinking that. And I know it seems unfair, and you might think, well, what did I do wrong? But then I promise you, and Tawnee will probably agree with me here, that at the end of the day, when you come out the other side of this, even though it's going to be a lot of battles, whatever your personal battles are, you are going to be so glad it happened the way it did. And you will face the demons in your life that most women, and tell me if you agree, Tawnee, I feel like most women have to attack these demons when they're coming back from pregnancy, particularly when it comes to like the lifestyle changes of like letting go of like perfection and letting go of, maybe being a certain way or looking a certain way. When most women reach this, it's when they have had their baby and they're trying to like get back in time of what's like socially acceptable. Whereas I feel like if you have issues like we have had and like many of the listeners will have, you are forced to face those issues now. So you're forced to face it while you're on your own, while you don't have a screaming baby in your arm, or you don't have sleep deprived from restless nights or whatever. You get to deal with it ahead of time. So it's actually a blessing. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, it goes back to, social media and our connection with people is such a beautiful thing in one way, but at the same time, it doesn't settle well with a lot of us. And you have a lot of people out there posting how quick they got their postpartum body back to, extreme fitness. The worst thing I've seen is these bump only pregnancies where women are like, still keep your body and just only have this little bump that grows. I mean, dude, I don't know about you, but I'm going to let my body. I mean, I've already gained 6 pounds in my first trimester. I'm not even through my first trimester. My doctors say I'm 100% healthy right now. I know some women who gain no weight or actually lose weight because they're so sick. And it's just everybody's journey is slightly different and how we bounce back is slightly different. So, I think what you're talking about still goes back to this idea of comparisons and what is posted out there in the world of how quickly you can get back to not only your perfect body or your definition of a perfect body, but racing. Of course, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't already thinking about things that I want to do athletically after the baby comes back and like new goals that I'm already, dabbling with in my head. But it's not in an unhealthy way. It's kind of like, what's going to be fun to achieve next year? Because, ever since I quit competitive racing, my husband and I have always just been into trying new things, whether scuba diving, backpacking, whatever it is. And so it's like, what's the next adventure going to be? And how are we going to be able to incorporate a baby into it now,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's definitely a tough thing when, especially if you're very involved in the health, fitness, and endurance sports world, to let your shape and your look define who you are.
Mm-hmm.
But again, just like I, was saying about don't let your struggle be your identity. We can't let our body shape or whatever condition we're currently in, like let us, be a sign of our worth or value or any of those things,
Yeah, I think that's so important. And then one more thing I just want to add for anyone listening who, I don't know, I think this is kind of going along with what you actually did, but I just kind of gave it to myself as like a backup plan. Like if you do decide that maybe not even for getting pregnant, maybe you just, you're 21, 22 years old and you're thinking, this isn't healthy. I don't want to get to the point where like Tawnee and Tina, where I have years and years of not having a cycle. I want to get mine back now, but it's scary. Like I don't want to give up my running goals. Well, the thing about running or triathlons, even just training in general, is you can always go back to it and you can always keep that in your mind. Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember in the time I was trying to decide whether to stop running, and one of my friends pulled me aside and she said, you're making this into a like life decision where it's like you never run a step again, or you run every day.
You really are all or nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. And she said to me, like, you could stop running for a month and then say, you know what, this isn't for me, and then pick it back up again. And yeah, it might take a little while to come back, but you can do it. And so I think it's important for anyone listening to not see it as this ultimatum of like, it's the end. And yeah, it might take a little bit longer to come back if you do decide that it isn't for you, or you say, I've given this 6 months and it's just not working. You can say, okay, I'll give myself another month. And then if that doesn't work, then I'll go back to running, whatever. But then you might get to that month and say, okay, I'll give it another month. But stop seeing it as like, this is the end of the road. Like I'm never coming back. And so for me, even now, I'm kind of thinking to myself, you know what? If I really wanted to, I could have this baby, have time to recover, and still have a year to make it to the 2020 trials if I really wanted to. But I know Absolutely. In reality, I'm probably not going to do that, but it's still there in my mind to kind of reassure me that like I'm not ever going to run again. So I think that's something I just wanted to mention, because I know that's kind of goes along with how you did it, where you pulled back slowly. But that was my way of getting around that, is that I just said in my mind, if I want to go back, I can.
Still there. I think about that too. A lot of these transitions that you and I are talking about are similar to athletes that go into retirement and, most likely elite or professional athletes. And that's a huge topic. It's a very emotional, tough psychological process to go through retiring, especially, you're probably still, I don't know, late 40s, early 50s or so. And so you're still healthy and fit and all those things. You're just not competing the way you always knew it. And when people make transitions like we are, when they're trying to get their health and life back on track, it's very similar. And it's an identity crisis in a way. Mm-hmm. So I think you're right in the sense that, for those of us who are in our 20s and 30s and even 40s, I mean, heck, I know triathletes who didn't even start doing the sport until they were in their 60s. So please, we have a lifetime ahead of us, right?
Yeah.
And I've gone through the whole emotional process of, will I ever do another triathlon again? I just sold my bike this year, and it was something I was ready for. I've held on to it since my last triathlon in 2014. It took me 3 years to sell the bike. And that doesn't mean I'm never going to do it. My mom's like, how are you going to be okay? That means triathlon's over. I'm like, no, it doesn't. Mm-hmm. It just means that right now, having that bike sitting in the garage collecting dust isn't necessary, but it's always there if I want it. Mm-hmm. And that's something too, where, I wonder with all this knowledge, and I'm curious how like you'll feel about this too, getting back to it, like how you would do things differently, in that sense, knowing that we are potentially more sensitive as far as our bodies responding to the training. And even if we're able to perform well, like at what price, and how you would change things in that next chapter of competition to keep yourself in check. And that's why, when I did that marathon, it was so important to me, but it was only one race. We're not even talking about a full season or two of competitive racing or anything.
No, no, you're exactly right. And that is, something I've been thinking about a lot lately is I remember when you and I first started working together and you said to me like, you can still keep running. You can still run like I think you said 3 hour or 3:20 marathon. And I was like, no. Like I am
I'm sorry, there's nothing wrong with that.
No, I just meant that I meant that. No, sorry, that probably sounded really bad. I meant that as in like for me, I would rather like not run a marathon than be that far away from like my best, and knowing that like I would have to train the way that you mentioned, which is like math, kind of keeping your heart rate low. And although now thinking about it, actually my way of thinking has changed. And I want to ask, this is the next thing I want to ask you about is, firstly, to answer your question, I've definitely thought about the coming back thing and how I would do it differently. And I definitely think in the future, I've realized how thin I actually was at like the peak of my fitness. I think in my head, I thought I was slim, but still bigger than the other girls I was racing against. But now I see that I was actually the same size as them. And that was not healthy for my body weight, because coincidentally, I have landed right at the weight I started losing my regular periods. At this weight, I had it fine. And I've ended up back at the weight I was as a teenager. I've ended up back at the weight I was when I just intuitively ate. I didn't think about diets or eating a certain thing. I just ate kind of intuitively. So all those kind of things I've learned, and it's funny, I've gone like a full circle. But I have thought about how if I do start running and I do start training again, even if I do end up being maybe 10 pounds heavier than I was, I'm going to keep eating more than I was and resting more than I was. Because, you kind of realize that like, you can maybe shave off a minute or two, but is it really worth your health? And for me, I've kind of realized that the answer is no.
I see much more as a problem with female runners than even female triathletes. I think female triathletes still kind of have this more muscular tone that they get through the other sports.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's, potentially a less focus on weight. I mean, it is a focus, but not like I see it with female runners where weight and size seems to be everything, and the comparisons with girls running around you. And it's a battle when I'm working with someone to say like, honey, like you may feel like you're still like the bigger one of, your competitive group, but think about it in terms of the population.
Yes.
You like Tina, you gaining 15 pounds, like you look completely normal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like all of a sudden you went from too skinny to obese because you just, started eating more liberally and working out less. The body's really smart at self-regulating. Mm-hmm. And you'd have to go to a full other extreme to start going and, tipping in that other direction to do things that would be unhealthy for you as far as like too much weight gain goes. And I'm sure you're probably pretty impressed with how much you ate, and yet your body is still very, very normal right now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I always draw on when I'm talking about these kinds of things is the idea of, athletes are always about wanting to do the impossible. Whether that's achieve a race or course or whatever it is that's, seen as impossible, this impossible feat, who can ever do that? And then achieving these impossible to, maintain physiques. Mm-hmm. It's the same way in bodybuilding. Those bodies are not sustainable. But in running and in triathlon, we just want to have this impossibly perfect body. But in reality, doing the possible, especially when it's healthy for your body, there's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. We live in this world of no pain, no gain, and go harder and do things that your neighbor would never be able to do. But what's wrong with just wanting to achieve or have a body that's able to achieve the possible? Mm-hmm. And I think that was a huge thing for me to realize, is that I was always so focused on like being this elite athlete, this business owner, this successful podcast host, this fitness model, like all these things that are relatively impossible that not a lot of people are able to achieve, let alone all together, to then all of a sudden wanting to do all these things that are possible. And that was like hard for me. It was, it was like, wait a minute, you mean you just want me to like chill out and have an average body and make a baby? Those are all normal things. But for me, that was hard to wrap my head around at first.
Absolutely. And I'm the same way. And I think one thing that is worth mentioning is you said about our bodies are so good at regulating. And I think in my head, and I don't know if you had the same thing, but I had this kind of thing of, okay, if I really let myself go, I'm going to end up obese. Like, I'm going to be that woman who waddles down the street and can barely get up the stairs. And you forget that, like, there's this whole range of normal people in between the very lean and you can completely see their abs and ripped. And, you know, those kind of people who can't make it up the stairs, there's a whole range of normal people. And I think
Absolutely.
In our heads, we think that you're going to, like, as soon as you let go, you're just going to not be able to stop and your stomach's going to grow and you're going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then suddenly, you know, one day you wake up and you're like obese, and it just doesn't work that way. Your body will find where it's comfortable. And yeah, you will be ravenous for a few weeks, but it will find its happy place, and it will be eating more than you think. It will just kind of sit there. But yeah, I want to talk about that then for a minute. So both of us are pregnant. You are about 2 weeks ahead of me, I think.
About 10 weeks right now.
You're at 10 weeks. Yeah. So that's 2 weeks ahead. And so I've been running a little bit, but only as I feel like. I did mention that in my blog post that I've been pretty sick, and you know this.
Yeah.
And I know you've gone through waves of nausea, but like maybe we'll talk
like
about
you.
that. We'll talk about that in a minute if you want.
Okay. Okay. I was going to say on that, I think here's this is just completely speculative in my head, but I gave my body years to regulate, and I went through some period hell. Like my menstruation, oh my gosh, going from a girl with no hormones and basically having like a male-like body and just being able to do whatever I want whenever I wanted as far as training and competition goes, to having a female body and having this monthly cycle, and especially that week leading into starting my period. I went through hell for a while getting used to that and my hormones balancing and the fluctuations, you know, PMS and potentially even PMDD type symptoms. And I think it was because I was on a period hiatus for a decade, basically, that it took a while for me to get my body really back to regulating well. And when I've worked with professionals on this, like, I don't want to be too much TMI right now, but we're talking about even monitoring the blood flow within a cycle can be telling of how your body's operating as far as, you know, hormones and menstrual cycles go. Again, I don't need to go into too much detail there. And obviously everybody knows about typical PMS symptoms, but I got to a place where, you know, when we started trying, I felt great. My body was operating like clockwork, you know, 28-day cycles, ovulating on day 14. It was like textbook. And so I think my body was very ready for this as far from a hormonal standpoint. And you're one of the very lucky few where, you know, you nailed the timing and you got pregnant right away, but your body's gone from like zero hormones, whatever it was, 12 weeks ago, to all the hormones. And that's gotta have an impact, right?
Yeah.
You know,
that's what I was saying.
So there's not one right way or wrong way here. It's just, again, everybody's experience is going to be slightly different. And who knows, maybe that's why your morning sickness has been a little bit more impactful on you than mine has been, you know?
Yeah.
And then again, it's funny though, because I've read one book in particular where it said women who don't get morning sickness, that's a sign that they were healthier and having a better diet and didn't need to detox or any of these things before. But then at the same time, I've read probably even more wisdom that says, you know, the signs of morning sickness and nausea and fatigue are actually really good signs that it's a really strong pregnancy. What's one to believe? I mean, you just got to decide for yourself, listen to your body, work with your doctor, and make sure that you're healthy. It doesn't matter if there's a right way or a wrong way in it, you know?
This has absolutely been the biggest lesson for that. And yeah, I definitely think that my body is kind of in a bit of a crisis mode, because it is like, what are you doing to me? Like, I was just like in barren wasteland, you know, like imagine like tumbleweeds blowing across, and now looks what's happening. And I don't know if I've told you this example, but I feel like, you know, in Happy Feet, where the penguin, I can't even remember his name, is like, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to go find the answer. Or I can't even remember what he's looking for. Maybe freedom. I can't remember. The penguin leaves and he's like, I'll take it. And you see this often in movies where, like, you know, Minions. There's all kinds of movies where like the pack is like left behind and then one goes off or a few go off. And I kind of saw myself as like, that was my like egg. And they pushed the best egg forward and they said, you go, like, take the brunt, see what happens. And, but like, yeah, I think my body is just like wondering what's going on. But this has definitely been the biggest lesson. And you mentioned it about like fatigue as well, like letting go of like, you can't work all day long like you used to. You can't control anything really. It's just completely up to your body, and yours is going to be completely different. You know, I've read all these like little hacks that people say about morning sickness, and hardly any of them worked for me. But I found like other things that work for me. So like, you just kind of, unfortunately, there is no like answer here. It's just kind of learning to listen to your body. And what about you with training? Maybe tell us a bit about what you've been doing training-wise.
You know, every smart woman will do at this time, everybody's different. So what works for me may not work for you. I've kept it pretty similar to what I was doing leading into my pregnancy. So I was still running regularly, you know, cross trainings, obviously stand-up paddleboarding, strength training, all that kind of stuff. So I would say I'm right now averaging 2 to 3 runs a week. And those are going to be anywhere from 3 to 5 miles at a very aerobic pace. I was going to start wearing a heart rate monitor, but I haven't gotten around to it, to be honest. And I'm really smart at being intuitive with my body, you know, and I know that my paces are super comfortable right now. So I'm not doing myself any harm. I'm doing strength training with weights probably 2 times a week at home. So, you know, I'm doing like 20-minute sessions, and then also some body weight strength training and yoga movements. I'll probably start going to a prenatal type yoga class pretty soon. But for now, I've just been doing stuff at home. I'm going to be doing a natural birth and working through a midwifery. So it's very, very important for me to make sure that my hips are loose. You know, my body's functional in the sense that I can get down into a really deep squat and hang out there for as long as I need to, that I can be in all these positions and feel comfortable and feel strong, because who knows what that day is going to be like. And I'm so excited for it. But yeah, and then my husband and I are going to start swimming a little bit more in the pool, something casual. We haven't quite done that yet. It's a beautiful time of year to, you know, get outside and get some vitamin D in that sense. And that's about it, I think, right?
Which is a pretty good balance of things. And what about if you do have a day where if you don't feel good, like if you had a day where you felt particularly sick, have you been like forcing yourself out there, or is it kind of like, no, you know what, I'm just going to take a rest day?
There's different levels. You know, Saturday, I had just gotten back. I was in Arizona speaking at a sports nutrition conference. And even though we were pretty mellow, didn't really work out, I got back and I was just wiped out, tired from that. And Saturday, I literally laid around the house. I had intentions to go running with the dog and do all these things. And I just ended up laying around all day. I think at one point I even took like a 3-hour nap. And whenever I wasn't laying around, I was eating. And that was my day. And I was fine with it. And then the following day, I woke up feeling like a rock star. And my dog and I went running, you know, a little over 5 miles. And it was actually like pretty decent. And I felt good. And my energy was awesome. And so every day's been kind of different. There's some days where I feel like my nausea kind of would set in like after breakfast and before lunch. And so going on a walk or an easy run actually helped mitigate that a little bit for me. So I can't say that I forced myself out the door, but I maybe didn't feel like, oh, I'm so excited to go running or walking. But I know like once I'm out there, I'm going to feel better. And usually that would work out. There's only been like once or twice where I've walked back inside and said like, there's no way I'm doing anything right now. And I've been averaging about 7 hours or so of activity. And that includes a lot of walking too.
Yeah, no, that's good. And pretty ideal as far as it goes for health-wise.
7 hours a week.
And I guess I'll say for anyone who is interested, for me, it's just kind of been a bit more of a case of how do I feel today? Because I did have to take, I think, 4 or 5 days of nothing when my sickness was really bad. And then I took maybe 3 or 4 days a few weeks before that when the sickness was really bad. But then for the most part, I try and get out to run 2 or 3 times a week, same as Tawnee, like 3 to 5 miles. And then I have been strength training just twice a week. And that's all I've really been doing right now. But it has very much for me been a case of like, if I really don't feel good, I have just had to like listen, because I did take, it wasn't even exercise. I think I did exercise in the morning, and then I just had a really busy day. I drove to Louisville and back, which is an hour and a half each way. And I just had so much stuff to do. And then the next day I felt terrible. So I think I really have to be careful with pushing myself. Maybe at this point, I'm hoping it's just till my body kind of understands what's going on. And I'm going to have a real test, Tawnee. I haven't told you this, but on 4th of July, I actually entered to do a race. I'm not going to race it. I'm fully intending, it's a 10K, fully intending to just kind of keep my heart rate low, just enjoy the atmosphere. And I'm actually kind of excited to like be able to like look around and like take it in and be with like a different crowd. Like I'm going to be surrounded by like other people who are running, I've been averaging about 9 to 10 minute pace, like just around that crowd. And so it's just going to be, I'm kind of excited, but I'm really hoping that, I'm going to wear my heart rate monitor so that it beeps if it gets too high, because I don't want my competitive switch to go on. I
did a race already while pregnant. You should read my blog. I just posted a blog on it yesterday, talking a little bit about, okay, cool. Yeah. And I went through, it was a very low key stand-up paddleboard race, and I was leading, and there was a moment when I was passed, and I mean, part of me, of course, wanted to match her. And I think on any other non-pregnant day, I definitely could have and had a little battle, and it would have been fun. But on that day, I was like, you know what? That's not the goal right now. Like, I'm totally fine. The fact that I'm even doing this right now is totally awesome. My baby's first race in the womb, and it's a blast. And you'll take care of yourself. You'll be smart for sure.
Yeah, no, it's kind of cool that pregnancy gives you that extra like moral questioning where you can be like, in the past, you'd kind of be selfish. You'll be like, all right, I'll just deal with the consequences. Whereas this is like, you're like, oh, am I really willing to sacrifice like some consequences that maybe it will, maybe it won't. And you start to think of everything. So it's definitely a good like moral compass for us all to kind of go a bit straighter if we've kind of veered off in the past, feeling like we can get away with anything. Whereas now you realize that you can't. So, okay, just a few more things. So we've kind of talked a lot about pregnancy and kind of our stories today, but like both of us have been very like vocal, I guess, about getting the word out about female health and female hormones. Yeah. So maybe you could just kind of talk a little bit about what you've been doing to kind of, you said you went to that conference, maybe talk a bit about that and what you've been doing to kind of help promote female hormone health.
Yeah, definitely. I work more probably in like the world of science and research as far as all that. That's what I'm trained in from my education. So all that is very important to me to at least understand what the science says on all these kinds of things. That's why, you've had Nico Ronaldo on the show, and her book was like a Bible to me as far as like all the research presented and everything. And I take that to heart very deeply when it comes to working with clients one-on-one for sure. Again, as I said earlier, though, it turns out that every female and their journey is going to be slightly different as far as the mental, psychological, emotional side of it. But I like to be, presenting that kind of stuff. And one of the big places that I do that these days is on my Inner Circle community, which is called Life Post Collective.
Yep.
And it's not just oriented toward women, although I guess I should admit there might be a little bit of a bias toward, female stuff. But I write pretty openly about things of like how to manage your eating and not let it get too restrictive, and how to eat for, health and performance benefits and the mental side of it and all those things, and presenting a lot of research, and citing a lot of things that I use in my cases as well as experience, of course. So that's kind of a cool community that I've started to build. I'm really happy about how that's going for sure. And you can check that out at lifepostcollective.com. But, I'm also in the works of some other projects that are top secret right now. If you ever want to ask me a question, whether me or one of our experts, of course, a lot of our shows on Endurance Planet are Q&A based. So we've covered a lot on female health. I've had, experts like Nico as well on my show, Stacey Sims, and a lot of other female health experts. So you can check out the archives there and just, drilling it, like just talking about it on social media or whatever, and most of all, just making sure that these topics are not taboo. I think even for me, like one of the things that scared me so much in the beginning was that I felt like I was the failure because my body wasn't menstruating or doing the things that it should be. And that if people knew that, they would think less of me because, I wasn't operating like a normal female would. And it was scary to want to come clean, if you will, about that. But, that's dumb because the fact is this happens to so many women. And if we continue to set the tone that this is, this very like dark thing that you shouldn't talk about openly, women are not going to get the help that they need.
Yeah.
And they're going to continue to get answers that aren't going to work for them. So they're just going to let it continue to cycle through like you and I did for, you were almost there for a decade too, before getting the confidence or, just the ability to stand up and be like, you know what, I need to make a change for myself. So I think the biggest thing is just making sure that these things are not taboo. And the more we just talk about them casually, the more it's just like, okay, it is what it is. Let's, let's work through it. And there's pretty much 100% chance that you're going to get yourself back to a good place if you do these few things. And it's not that big of a deal. It's not a death sentence.
Absolutely. And I think, as you haven't mentioned it yet, but I think this is something that is relevant probably to a lot of people listening. You did also have the added complication of at the beginning of overcoming an eating disorder. So anyone who is listening, this isn't just Tawnee kind of saying, oh, I eat so well and I gained weight and it was fine. But Tawnee did have to go through an extra layer of dealing with that. So if you are someone who thinks maybe you are dealing with that, that she might be a good person to reach out to, or to, join Life Post Collective, because it is fantastic and just such a great resource. And once again, I know I've mentioned this 100 times, but also Tawnee spoke about it as well. If you were to do one thing right now, buy No Period Now What? I mean, that's the easiest thing to do. If you are doubting it, if you're kind of skeptical, just buy that book. It will change the way you look at things. It will make you feel like you're not alone. And that is just, of everything, that is the one thing I would say. I will put a link in the show notes, but again, it's No Period Now What by Dr. Nicola Rinaldi. Okay, Tawnee, I think we are closing up here, but I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, who is UCAN, who I know you are a huge fan as well. But before I do, before we get on to the Running for Real 4, as I'm sure people are curious, any weird cravings or any weird aversions?
We could do like part 2 of the podcast with the things I've been eating and not eating. Definitely for me, carbs and dairy have been at the top of the list. I can't do gluten, unfortunately. I tried and it definitely did not settle with me. And that was something, whatever, it's not that big of a deal. But I was, like I said, I was pretty low carb before I got pregnant. And my body's like, it does not want to have a low carb pregnancy. So all of a sudden I started eating all the carbs and it's been awesome. And dairy, which is something I was not eating before the pregnancy either. But all of a sudden, just everything dairy, cheese, yogurt, whatever it is, just started sounding and tasting amazingly. And all of a sudden my body miraculously digests it and handles it just fine. Other than that, things have been weird. Actually, I've been craving, I was just thinking about this last night. I've been craving a lot of seaweed salads. So perhaps it's the iodine in those. I love seaweed salads.
Yeah, but you said you've got good places you can trust. I feel like in Kentucky, we're not going to have
it's not raw fish. So we're not talking about sushi here, just the seaweed salad. You can even, you can get the dried seaweed at grocery stores, soak it and make your, I was downloading some recipes off Pinterest last night. Also like really rich, creamy things like soups, like with a coconut milk base, just really calorically dense things. Like my body just, even though I'd already gained, 10 or so pounds in addition to, my years of recovery before I got pregnant, I think my body quickly just wanted to get to an even more comfortable weight, if you will. So calorically dense foods, like any of like this, I haven't even had a salad since
No, me neither.
I can't and before I got pregnant, I'd eat salad every single day.
Yes, me too.
I'd eat eggs and avocado for breakfast every day. And I can't do, I can do eggs not with avocado. So it's just weird. I want like grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch instead of salads.
That was funny when we...
And to, make sure I'm still getting in my greens, I'm getting green juices, things like that. And I'm making vegetables. But that's why I think the soups have been good, because I'll do pureed soups in the Vitamix. So anyways, I could keep going on about nutrition.
It's like being a little kid where you're like just trying to sneak in vegetables without the kid in us or the baby in us maybe realizing. But yes, it's... Oh,
and one more thing, Halo Top those little pints of ice cream. I don't know if you've tried those before, Tina. I saw people posting like that they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I was like, all right, I got to try one of these, especially now that I'm eating dairy again. Seriously, Halo Top, where it's at.
Look, I've been kind of craving the last few days, like a good ice cream sandwich. That's something that's been sounding good. But I have absolutely loved kind of going back and forth, the two of us. Tawnee and I text, I'd say at least
close to daily.
At least 4 times a week. But like often it'll be, something that we're craving or something that we're wanting. And we went on a string where like you were eating yogurt, granola and fruit, and you sent me a picture, or maybe I saw a picture somewhere, and then I was like, I want that. So I started having that, and
you were doing grilled cheese.
And then I was doing grilled cheese, and then you got into grilled cheese. And then You sent me a picture one day of eggs when you found a way you could eat them, whereas I still can't bring myself to do it. But yeah, a lot of our diversions have been the same. A lot of our cravings have been similar. So it's been kind of fun. So
yeah,
I've really enjoyed that. But okay, we are just going to take a moment to thank Generation You Can, and I will be back with the Running for Real 4, which I just realized I didn't give you any warning about. So you're going to have to be on your best quick fire here. I may have stopped running, but one of my favorite sponsors still makes its way into my food every day. Generation You Can. You probably already know I'm a huge fan of You Can. No, I used it as my sole fuel source in my 2:36 marathon. And yes, I was a little bit scared I would bonk, but my energy levels felt exactly the same the entire way. I didn't have those ups and downs, the sugar highs and sugar lows that gels gave me. But maybe you're thinking, yeah, Tina likes You Can, but what is it? Well, You Can is a carbohydrate source originally created for a little boy named Jonah, who continually had low blood sugar. Years later, You Can is a favourite amongst many elites, including everyone's favourite, Meb Kaplesky. You Can is giving Running for Real listeners 10% off using code RUNNINGFORREAL. So check out generationyoucan.com for more about You Can and learn how it can help you control your blood sugar, fuel your races, and maybe make those bottomless pit stomachs of ours be happy for just a little bit longer post-run. All right, Tawnee, just the Running for Real 4 left, which I'm not sure you know anything about. So
you're putting me on the spot. Great.
I know. We're going to see how you handle this. The first one you'll be fine with. So that is a unique nutrition tip. Can I just say before you begin, Tawnee was the one who got me into that recovery bowl. So for anyone listening who has tried that combination of, I use sweet potato. I know you like to use squash, but squash or sweet potato, avocado, cinnamon, Generation You Can. I don't know if you put that in there.
Depends on the intensity of the workout coming out that day.
But anyway, Tawnee was the one that got me into that, so we can all thank her for that. But anyway, what is your unique nutrition tip?
Don't ignore your fats, for sure. I think too many endurance athletes are still overly reliant on carbohydrates. And while we can't also ignore carbs, we need them, although that can be argued by some. It's all about burning fat for fuel, baby. So make sure that you have metabolic flexibility and a good variety in your diet.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, next is a Running for Real moment. So maybe that's a moment where you were embarrassed or like scared or something that only a runner would understand.
Oh my gosh. I mean, there's probably too many times to even like all the embarrassing. So I did Boston Marathon, but I wasn't in it. I was dealing with some other health issues at the time, so I couldn't race the race I wanted to. And so it was one of those moments, kind of like you're describing with your upcoming July 4th 10K, where I literally just took in every sight and scenery and smell around me and really appreciated a race. You know, sometimes we rush to these race courses and these beautiful locations with all these people cheering for us, and we didn't even realize what just happened. So that was a moment, lots of moments, where I just soaked it all in. And oh my gosh, running Boston like that, it'd be cool to run it fast, but at the same time, running it like that was pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah, that is cool. And I hope someday I get to enjoy it like that as well. Okay, and then what about a high moment in your career? Maybe it can be one of your triathlon events, or it can be a running event, something that like meant a lot to you that you went through in your athletic career.
I think definitely there was one year where I didn't qualify for the 70.3 World Championships at the first half Ironman I did at Vineman, the one race I talked about earlier. So I quickly signed up for another one to try to qualify last minute. I think it was Michigan that we flew out to. My husband did the race as well. And I did qualify. I just put it all out there and got, I can't remember, first or second in my age group. And that was when I felt really in control of my fitness, where I could, and you know, kind of the even way professionals operate, where, you know, I didn't get the goal I wanted at that first race. So I just was able to pull the trigger on another race, go out, execute, achieve. And it felt awesome.
Yeah, I bet. And it always feels so much better when you've had like a near miss or a setback, because you realize how much it means to you. So yeah, pretty cool.
You're a little bit more hungry that next go around, you know?
Exactly. Okay. And then what do you tell yourself when you're on the start line of a race?
Don't focus on the finish, focus on the process.
Love that. That's really cool. All right. One more thing. I'm going to completely confuse you here because I usually give people a warning, but I have people send in what I call a power pose. That's a position you would stand in maybe in the starting area or like before maybe you were going to do a presentation where you're like what you would stand in to feel confident. Will you send us a power pose to put in the show notes to show people how you would build your confidence?
Yeah. So just a picture of me doing some pose?
Yep. That is
awesome.
Up to you.
Okay.
All right, my dear friend Tawnee, this was an amazing episode. It was so personal, and I wanted everyone to kind of hear your story because we have just been so connected this whole time and wanted people to hear about it. So tell people, you've obviously said about your blog and Life Post Collective and Endurance Planet, which I'll put links to, but
too many.
Where's the best place for people to find you?
If you want to contact me for coaching, coachtawny.com. It's TAWNEE. That's probably where you can send inquiries, contact me for coaching purposes. I'm really easy to get a hold of on social media, whether Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Tawnee Gibson now. It used to be Tawnee Prazak, but now it's Tawnee Gibson. And then contact us at questions or admin@enduranceplanet.com. Those are emails where you can ask questions that I directly intercept all those. So I see everything that comes through if you want a question for the show or whatever it is. So yeah, I don't make it very hard. I know my co-host Lucho on our show Endurance Planet, he's like, if you can find me, then I'll talk to you. Whereas I'm like, I'm pretty available.
Yeah. And that's a good thing to be. People love that. Well, my friend, thank you so much for coming on. This has been wonderful. I really enjoyed it. And I know everyone else will have too. So I look forward to us both kind of sharing our journey as we continue on with this part.
Yay.
Well, I hope that was a fun-filled, interesting episode for you, regardless of whether you are pregnant, want to get pregnant, or even if you're a man who has absolutely no interest in anything about that. Hopefully it was an entertaining episode. I absolutely love Tawnee. I hope you do too. And, we will be updating as we go along. And I think this is really important, like she said, that we're getting the conversation going. If you do want to hear more about my story, as I did kind of leave it to Tawnee a lot of the time because I wanted to get her story out because you know enough about my story. I'm always talking about it. I have it on my blog. But I wanted to get Tawnee's story out because hers is definitely a different approach to the way that I did it in such a cutthroat kind of way. And I think it's going to be very effective for a lot of people out there who aren't quite ready to take the extreme that I did. So you can find everything that we talked about today at tinamuir.com/pregnancy podcast. And I will have everything we need there. You will have all the links to Tawnee's blog posts, all her various websites, all her social media, everything like that. You can also get to the blog post I wrote about my story, which you can also find at tinamuir.com/pregnant. And I will have lots more updates about how things are going. If you are enjoying this episode, I really, really hope you will sign up to hear updates from me in the future about amenorrhea recovery. I will have links to that in the show notes and also in that pregnancy post because I think it's so important if you are thinking about taking this step, but you just kind of want someone to talk to, someone to confide in. I am planning on setting up counselling appointments, or not counselling, I guess it would be more like consulting or just a friend to kind of talk to. Appointments for people to kind of talk to me and get that like support because I know how scary it is. So I will be giving you more updates on that. So make sure you sign up, put your email in there, and you can find that at the show notes or also on that pregnancy post. Thank you so, so much in advance for signing up for any reviews or subscriptions or anything like that. This is a huge day for me. I'm kind of interested to see how it takes off in the media, whether it's going to be portrayed positively, whether people are going to hate me, like what's the deal here? But I want to thank you guys for all your support and for being there for me throughout this whole process. I hope you have a wonderful week and I will speak to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.